everybody, and welcome to Psyched Out. I'm not going to do the entire intro because I accidentally did not record my first iteration of this, and I'm a little upset about it, so we're having to completely redo everything that I already spent the last hour talking about. So we're just going to go ahead and jump on into it. So like I said last time, we are going to do Hannibal. Today's episode is Hannibal, the movie. We're going to go through the plot, and then we're going to talk about some of the things that I found interesting in the film, including some relationships and symbolisms and things like that. I will say that this, because I'm having to re-record, I might not go in as much detail as I did the first time, but I will try to remember everything that I said, because some of this is scripted, some of this is not. But the film starts out with Barney, good old Barney. For those who don't remember, Barney is the black nurse who worked at the asylum in the first movie. We love him, super sweet. Love that guy. He's actually giving an interview to some butler dude and a guy named Verger. Now, Verger's face is very, very messed up. We will learn why. And if you haven't seen the film, this is going to sound really fucked up. But the best way that I can explain it to you is like if a Who from Whoville got mauled by a bear and then had really shitty plastic surgery to fix his face. That is what Verger looks like. We don't really have to know anything to know that Verger is a victim of Hannibal. We get a little more info as to specifically how that plays in, or basically how he's associated with Hannibal. We get that a little bit later, but it's established very early on, because how else are you going to have a face that has been that brutalized? So, Barney presents Verger with the classic Hannibal mask. And this dude's like, hey, I'll pay you $250,000 for it. So already we're establishing that Verger has a very clear obsession with Lecter. And something that's interesting is that he makes it clear that Barney is a frequent customer of his when it comes to providing him with Hannibal memorabilia. It feels weird to say that, but I think that's kind of the best thing that you could call it. And somehow Barney has all of this Hannibal stuff, because this film takes place 10 years after the original one. And so, obviously, Hannibal is on the run. He has escaped. He's not going to... there shouldn't really be any of Hannibal's belongings still around. But Barney has them. And Barney is making money off of it. And honestly, I can't really fault him. Get your bag, boo. You had to put up with that guy for a very long time. So... after this initial sale of the classic Hannibal mask to Verger for $250,000, we get the credits, because films back in the day don't put credits at the end, so we get this nice little credit montage. Then we cut to some random lady in a truck, and this dude is just downing like a cold water bottle, which I was so jealous of when I was watching this, because I watched it super early in the morning because I couldn't sleep, and I didn't have like a nice cold water bottle in the house, so I was very jealous. The random lady is actually Clarice, but I didn't know that because I was expecting Jodie Foster and wasn't really prepared for the fact that it wasn't her. I very much felt like a kid who was like, where's my mom? Bring her back. I'm lost in a store and I don't know what to do. But, yeah, Jodie Foster is not Clarice in this film. So in case you didn't know, now you do. I was very much surprised. Because I don't think that Clarice is supposed to have, like, strawberry blonde hair, but she does. So here we are, new actress. She does a very phenomenal job. So kudos to her for stepping in those shoes and filling that big of a role. So, good job. Now... we establish here that Clarice is in charge of some big sting operation with the DEA. For those who don't know, the DEA stands for Drug Enforcement Agency. And there is a big blonde asshole. His name is Bolton. And we don't like him because as soon as Clarice arrives, he's already doing the stupid bullshit. I'm a man. My agency is better. I should be in charge. You don't know what you're talking about. Very, very obvious with the misogyny and the fact that he does not want to be taking orders from a woman. But Clarice is like, whatever, sucks to suck, dude. I'm in charge. My agency is working with yours. I've dealt with this lady before. This lady is named Evelda, which is a very interesting and kind of pretty name, I'll be honest. But they're dealing with her. She's known for a lot of drug, like, charges and things like that. They're talking about raiding a meth lab across the street from a fish market. I put in my notes, dope, in reference to the meth lab, which is not a pun that I intended, but it's kind of funny. They're talking about Evelda, and they're saying, hey, she's HIV positive. She will not go to prison willingly. She will kick, bite, spit, do anything that she can. She'll put needles in her hair, so if you grab her head to put her in the car, like, be careful, you could get poked, things like that, which, you know, having HIV or AIDS doesn't make you any lesser of a human being, but in law enforcement work, it's a very real thing that you have to be cognizant of. Like, I've dealt with plenty of people who have HIV or AIDS, and, you know, you want to be careful with if they're bleeding, like, if you're exposed to it and things like that. And a lot of people, thankfully, are like, hey, I'm HIV positive. Hey, I have AIDS. Like, they're very upfront about it, which I appreciate. But not everybody is that way, and so them kind of layering this into the film, which I thought was pretty realistic. Clarice talks about how she's gotten Evelda on some previous RICO charges, things like that. So she's had interactions with this individual previously. In the film, we see Evelda walk out with a little baby strapped in like this big chest harness. I do not have babies, so I don't know exactly what to call it, but she has this baby strapped to her chest. And as soon as Clarice sees this, she's like, nope, we're calling it off. Because they're, again, like I said, they're in this big, super busy fish market, which this is stupid as shit in the first place. I don't know why you would set this up here, but whatever. For plot purposes, I suppose. She's like, nope, it's too busy. There's too many people. There's a baby. Like, we're not doing this. Other FBI agents and other agencies that are working on this sting operation are like, yep, we copy. We're calling it off. And Bolton's like, no, fuck you guys. We're not calling this off. We're going to keep doing it anyways. And he pulls out his gun. And the bodyguards that are with Evelda are like, oh my god, that blonde twink has a gun. And, yeah, then they all start shooting at each other. And it's like the dumbest, worst gunfight that I've ever seen in my entire life. Because you realistically would not engage in this type of gunfight with civilians ever. Like, it's not something that would happen, let alone with a baby right there. Terrible tactics. They're all just standing in the open, getting shot at by people with automatic weapons. It's stupid. It's appalling. I don't understand it. But I also get that it's for Hollywood and movie purposes, so it's not going to be, like, actual tactical things that make sense. Evelda is like, I'm not going to show you my hands. And Clarice is like, show me your hands. And then Evelda whips out this automatic, like, pistol. I think Clarice calls it a MAC-10. I don't know a lot about guns. And just starts shooting at Clarice. Clarice gets hit like 6 times in the vest. She pops one shot at Evelda, which hits her like somewhere in the neck right here. I shouldn't have laughed, but she like flew back against the car, just getting shot once, which I was told in my firearms training, like, that doesn't happen in real life. You don't fly backwards after getting shot, especially from like a Glock. It's just not realistic, but they do it in Hollywood because it's dramatic, but the force of a bullet is not going to throw you backwards. You might fall because you're in pain or because you got hurt, depending on where you got shot, but like realistically, it's not going to have enough force or momentum to throw you back into a car. Clarice then takes the baby that is now covered in its mother's blood and starts to wash it off in a nearby fountain, which is actually a motif that we see a few times throughout the film. And then we learned that shit is going to hit the fan more than it already did. One thing I want to say is I'm very surprised that somehow out of all the bullets that were shot at Clarice, she didn't get hit by any of them outside of her vest. So good for her, you know? I that's like the dream. If you're going to get shot at, might as well have them all hit the vest. But yeah, she took it like a champ. Anyways, I was really hoping that Bolton would get his ass beat. Because in my opinion, all of that blood is on his hands. But he didn't, because why would you ever hold a man accountable for something? Part of that's because Clarice's name was on the sting operation. She was listed as being in charge of it, so a lot of the crap that was going to happen came back on her, which I don't think is fair. I don't think it's right, because she tried to stop it, but unfortunately, I don't make the plot of the movie. We then cut back to Verger, who is bedridden and watching what is happening on the news on like his 17 trillion monitors. And for some reason, he has this bougie like horse statue just chilling in his mansion. And honestly, good for him, I guess. Like, if I could have a cool horse statue like that, I would. But I don't know if I'd keep it in my house. It was just a weird thing that I noticed. Like, I don't know. I guess spend your millions of dollars how you want, but whatever. Anywho, it is very much established that Verger is a victim of Hannibal, specifically that he is the fourth victim and that he is the only one to survive. We will learn why later. We'll make some inferences about that, and I'll weigh in on the psychology of that a little bit if I can. Now, we go to a board meeting with Clarice, where we meet this guy named Krenler, who I absolutely hate because he is a big poopy face. He's a man, and he's a mean man, and yeah, nothing likable about him exists. But she's sitting there, they're scolding her and basically being like, do you know how bad this looks for the agency? Like, why didn't you do your job? Why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? And she's just kind of having to take it because at this point it's very clear that they're not going to take her side. But I did very much relate to Clarice because at one point she's like, I did what I was trained to do. If somebody is going to point a gun at you, you are trained to shoot back. She's like, I didn't hit the baby, there was a lethal threat, I responded with lethal force. And I've been in a position on my own a few times with just different jobs that I've had where you get shit on for doing your job. And the hard part is that you get shit on by people who taught you how to do that job. But then suddenly they switch up and have something to say about what you're doing wrong, even though you're doing it the way they taught you, just because a grand majority of people don't like the way that you're doing something. That is such a shitty experience. And I was like, Clarice, girl, I get you. We learn in this moment, this dude gets like a phone call or a page call. I think it was a pager. It might have been a phone. I don't really know. And he's like, oh, you should go talk to Verger. You're gonna be on this super secret special mission that has to do with Hannibal Lecter, and then maybe this will help your career not go in the shitter because you're a woman and you don't know what you're doing. So Clarice goes to Verger's gigantic mansion where we meet Cordell, who I thought was the butler originally, but it turns out he's Verger's physician, even though he definitely looks like a butler. We get a nice illuminated close-up effect of Verger's face, which I will say the practical effects makeup in this movie is very well done. But Verger basically just starts preaching and is like, hey, Clarice, do you believe in God? Which I thought was kind of interesting. And then he starts talking about time that he spent at a Christian summer camp, which we learn was where he preyed on young children with a lot of sexual assault offenses that he got cleared and pardoned for by the government because yay. We also learn that Verger was originally assigned to Lecter for therapy, and that Verger invited Lecter to his house. In this flashback sequence, we see Verger wearing the Hannibal mask, and we see him being flirtatious with Hannibal. During this time, Verger also mentions that he has a history of sex offenses, so this dude is very much not a good guy. And then he starts to discuss erotic asphyxiation. It's not called that in the film, but that's what it is. He's basically saying, like, oh, not being able to breathe really gets me off. And this is an actual thing. So erotic asphyxiation is something where the asphyxiation gets you aroused. It heightens your sexual experience, your sexual pleasure. And actually, the unfortunate thing is there's a lot of accidental deaths that happen from it, where people will make ligatures that are, in their mind, designed to not actually kill them, but slightly asphyxiate them to increase that sexual pleasure. And sometimes things go wrong. You didn't make, like, the noose right. You didn't tie the knot right. Some people have done it where, like, they're sitting on a chair and then the chair breaks, and then there's just weird things like that. I remember learning about this in college, and then we were taught about it again in the academy where, sometimes the death may seem mysterious, but if, somebody is stark naked and they have a ligature on their neck, it might not be that they were trying to commit suicide. It might have been an erotic asphyxiation type of thing. So it is a very real thing. I just didn't think that they were going to throw that in this movie, so that was pretty interesting. But yeah, I don't recommend looking it up because that's really weird, but that is what erotic asphyxiation is. Humans have a very interesting way of trying to get their rocks off, and that is one of the ways that people came up with it. But yeah, Verger talks about that. He talks about, very briefly, about how he was trying to kind of do that thing, try to do erotic asphyxiation and get Lecter to participate in it with him. And then Lecter basically snaps this popper thingy, and I'm assuming it has some type of drug in it. And it gets Verger really worked up. And he starts acting crazy, like swinging around on this like weird little rack thing. And Lecter says, I want you to tell me how you smiled to gain the confidence of a child. Again, harkening back to Verger's time at the church camp where he sexually assaulted children. During Verger's like weird crash out, he ends up breaking a mirror, and Lecter hands Verger a piece of glass and tells him to peel off his face and to feed it to the dogs. Verger then starts to take the glass and disfigure his own face. He later justifies this by saying, quote, "It seemed like a good idea at the time," end quote. And this is how Verger got his injuries. In the flashback, we see Lecter taking the hunks of meat and facial tissue that are falling off while Verger disfigures himself and feeding it to Verger's dogs. And I want to take a minute to talk about why this is so interesting to me. Because this film has a lot of themes when it comes to self-destruction and things like that. And this is the only victim where Lecter isn't the one to have done the disfigurement himself. Verger does it to himself at the mere suggestion of Lecter. He then gets this weird revenge complex where he wants to blame Lecter for his own choices. And he is probably the reason he survived is because Lecter didn't actually go after Verger the way that he did other people. And some people are like, well, why? And the way that I see it is he got more satisfaction watching this guy destroy himself than he ever would have gotten, killing Verger with his own hands. Here was a guy who was very much a sexual predator, who thought that he was hot and he was sexy and was just really full of himself. And then he's able to convince this dude to just brutally disfigure himself. Like, you are your own demise. You are destroying yourself. Like, you'll never be beautiful again. And realistically, the only person you have to blame is yourself. Obviously, Verger's not able to do that. He does end up blaming Lecter for it. But at the end of the day, it's all Verger's fault. He just projects his anger and his sense of rejection onto Lecter, because at the end of the day, Lecter rejects him. Lecter is like, I don't want anything to do with you. And the part that is most interesting to me is that realistically, like, Lecter didn't do anything. This is probably one of the only crimes where he's actually innocent. And it's interesting as well that Verger is listed as a Lecter victim when Lecter didn't actually dismember or disfigure his face. So it really shows that Verger has a complete inability to, one, take accountability for his own actions, which we see in the fact that he was never held accountable for sexually assaulting children, but also the fact that he, in the grand scheme of things, has no control over his own life. He has placed a lot of power and a lot of control on Lecter with no real reason in doing so. Because, again, he did it to himself. And then he spirals on this revenge arc of, I want revenge on Lecter. And he starts buying all of this weird Hannibal Lecter memorabilia. Like, he legitimately has no control over his life. And at the end of the day, it is all his fault. And I think that Lecter gets this weird satisfaction out of that, knowing, like, I didn't even have to do anything to you. You did all of this to yourself. And I think that's where he gets the pleasure out of it. And he doesn't really care that Verger is listed as a victim, because he's like, yeah, whatever, I guess I did it. So, again, just something that's really interesting. Now, during Clarice's time at Verger's mansion, Cordell gives her a file, and inside are x-rays of an arm from Buenos Aires. And I will say that during this conversation, as Clarice kind of looks at the x-ray, we get a little bit of symbolism when in regards to Clarice's relationship with Lecter and Verger's relationship with Lecter. Verger knew Lecter civilly and somewhat professionally because he had to be Lecter's therapist, but he crossed a line inviting Lecter to his house and trying to engage with Lecter romantically. And in the end, it ends with broken glass disfiguring and ruining his face. And Verger directly addresses the glass barrier that Clarice was behind when talking to Lecter. And Clarice also engages with Lecter civilly, but she doesn't cross that barrier of wanting him romantically or any type of interpersonal relationship. That glass is still there. The glass is never broken, so she's not getting hurt by it. She's not damaging herself by crossing a line that she shouldn't, the way that Verger did. So again, I think that's a little bit of symbolism there, where he crossed a barrier, an unseen barrier, that Clarice very much did not. Clarice eventually takes everything that Verger's given her and returns to the FBI and starts reviewing some tapes in the FBI basement. While she's doing this, we see a demonic, growling and screaming Hannibal Lecter as he chews on the face of a nurse at the psych ward. We also get a nice close-up of Barney, hello again, Barney, as he pulls Hannibal Lecter off of the nurse. And we learn that the x-ray is actually of Hannibal Lecter's arm, where it was fractured or broken because Barney removed him from the nurse. So, because of this, Clarice pays Barney a visit, and we see Barney pick up this dead pigeon and then later put it out on his porch where he lets all the other pigeons mourn it. And I just love Barney. He's just he's a sweetheart. He's a big teddy bear. I can't be upset with him at all. He's like one of my favorite characters, and he's hardly in either film. We love Barney. We stan Barney. So Clarice goes to see him, and they have this conversation about how Barney was one of the only people that was able to last 6 years dealing and treating Hannibal compared to a lot of other people. And she's like, how did you do it? And Barney's like, well, Lecter has a strange set of principles. He is okay with civilized individuals, but if you are rude and you're uncivilized, he doesn't want anything to do with you. And again, this is something that I think I discussed in the initial podcast episode. Like, Hannibal has a weird moral code, which we can discuss a little bit later. But Clarice isn't the only one that sees it. Like, Barney sees it too. He's like, hey, by the way, I don't have to be a psychiatrist to know that this dude just doesn't like rude people. Which, same, I don't like rude people either. Again, we learned that the x-ray was Barney breaking Lecter's arm after he took Lecter off the nurse. And then we learned that Barney, because he's a connoisseur of Hannibal Lecter memorabilia, has old tapes that were taken by Dr. Chilton. If you remember, I absolutely hate him. They were taken by him and recorded the conversations of Clarice with Lecter, and Barney gives them to Clarice and is like, hey, just so you know, those are worth a lot of money. Then we see Barney being nice to the dead little pigeon again, and again, I love Barney. He's a good guy. Clarice takes the tapes and she listens to the conversations that she had with Lecter. Some of the dialogue is taken specifically from the first movie. We then cut to a group of Italian individuals, which I was definitely not prepared for. They're at this big table in some weird hall with a bunch of pews. I think it might have been a church. And we learned that they're art and history curators. They're all smoking cigars, and we learned that one of them is actually Hannibal Lecter himself, who's posing as a protege of some sort of art collector who has mysteriously gone and vanished off the face of the earth. The funny thing is that Hannibal Lecter is incredibly recognizable. I know that they probably did that, so the audience is like, oh my god, it's Hannibal Lecter, I recognize him. But it's just funny to me to think that a bunch of Italians just don't know who he is, and he's like, I've only put on a silly little hat. No one will know the difference. But, yeah, he puts on this funky little white hat, and he goes by Dr. Fell now, who's this protege of a missing, super cool art curator. We then cut back to Clarice, who now has a letter addressed to her with this fancy little red wax seal. The letter has some very long paper in it. I didn't know you could make paper that long. And it's got this nice drawing at the bottom with, some bearded dude and then, a naked lady. While there is a voiceover of the letter, Lecter is seen playing the piano with specific newspapers of Clarice on the piano with headlines that are like, oh my god, this FBI agent shot 5 people. She sucks. Which I think is a little bit funny and a little bit cynical. We then get this really specific shot of Lecter licking the envelope all along the edge. And it amuses me solely because this is not one of those, adhesive envelopes that you keep at your house where you, lick it and then you put it down and, it sticks. This is very clearly not one of those. And then he seals it with a wax seal anyways. So, what was the purpose of licking the envelope, let alone like licking it that enthusiastically? I don't know. The shot is established, it's very much there, but I don't know what the purpose was of it. Anywho, we get to a point where Clarice is like, "Hey, this envelope smells kind of funky. There's like this weird perfume to it." So she takes it to a bunch of like people who I guess have really good noses, and a bunch of people sniff the letter, and they're like, "Ooh, it smells like fleece with a hint of lavender." And here's a list of areas that might have made and sold this perfume. And we get introduced to some other Italian agents in Florence who are reviewing like video footage, and we end up seeing a video clip of Lecter in a perfume shop smelling a perfume that we know is placed on the letter. We then get introduced to this Italian agent named Pazzi, who is kind of putting together who this guy is. He's like, "Dr. Fell? Nah, dog, that's Hannibal Lecter." So he starts tailing Lecter, and he's like watching Lecter drink out of a wine glass, but he has like a microfiber cloth that he's holding the glass at the base with, and then he wipes the rim off. So Lecter is very clearly making sure he's not leaving fingerprints or DNA behind. He's being very very cognizant of that. So Pazzi goes to the Lecter website, not the Lecter website, goes to the FBI website, where he ends up looking up Lecter. And he learns that there is a reward for Lecter's arrest, which is like $3 million. We kind of get this sense of Pazzi's character, that he works really hard at his job. He doesn't get a lot of recognition, and he would like to provide a better life for his wife, something that's a little more financially stable. So he's really drawn to the $3 million reward. And so we kind of get his motivation established for why he's interested in Hannibal Lecter, which is very different than why Clarice is interested. Clarice actually wants to stop him from killing people. This guy just wants a bunch of money. We cut back to the FBI basement, where Clarice is sitting there listening to some more tapes that she got from our good friend Barney, when Krendler enters the basement, and he sees the letter that was sent to Clarice by Lecter, again with the drawing of the naked woman on it, but in this instance, the breasts have been covered by a yellow sticky note. And he's like giggling to himself, and he goes over and he takes the sticky note off to look at the boobs of this drawn woman. And this scene really spoke to me, and I can't get into a lot of details of it, but this type of stuff happens in real life, and it's not just with drawings. In this type of work and environment, there is not a lot of respect for women and their genitalia. And I found it very striking, because I'm sure that this was done to establish the fact that Krendler's not a good guy, you shouldn't like him, but also like as a humorous thing of like, oh, guys will be guys. And unfortunately, it's 2025, and this type of behavior still persists to this day in these types of agencies. I have seen it myself. I have called it out myself, and I've gone to supervisors about it myself. And unfortunately, it's a type of behavior that is so integrated in the system, I don't think it will ever go away. But it very much struck me that, like, here we are having this little 3-second scene in a movie and recognizing that this type of stuff still happens in real life. And it's not just like a fictional thing played for laughs from a movie that was made long before I was born. So, again, it was tough to watch, but in a way I'm glad that it was there, because it really highlights actual behavior that exists in this type of environment. Krendler then notices that Clarice is there. Actually, Clarice is basically like, "Hey dude, I see what you're doing, you suck." And they start discussing Lecter. And immediately after admiring this drawing, Krendler's like, "Oh, I took Lecter for, quote, a queer," end quote. Dude, you literally just admired the drawing made by Lecter, and you're gonna be like, "Oh, he's gay, I don't like him." Shut up. But again, this type of language and ideology is used in agencies today. Again, without getting into specifics, I had to go to supervisors about this, because it is a persistent problem. This type of language is so ingrained in law enforcement agencies that I don't think it'll ever truly go away until we have a massive culture shift. And this change has to start somewhere, and I'm trying to make that change. But this was, again, a slap in the face of, like, wow, we really haven't progressed a whole lot as a society. And, like, this type of language isn't just used to establish the fact that Krendler's a bad guy. This type of language is very much real on a daily basis in these types of work environments. Part of the reason I think Krendler engages in this type of language and behavior with Clarice is because he feels very emasculated. It's kind of a callback to Bolton and some behaviors that we saw in the first movie, where men aren't taking kindly to the fact that not only is Clarice in the FBI, but she's also very good at her job. And because of the shitstorm that Clarice is in, he is going to prey upon her downfall. It's going to better him. Chances are he's probably not very well liked within the agency itself and amongst other men, so he's going to pick whoever he can to create an advantage for himself. And in this moment, that is Clarice. So he, in my opinion, is very emasculated, is very upset by the fact that Clarice probably even got to operate the drug sting in the first place. Now, what we get back to, again, is the Italian side of things, where Pazzi tries to call in a tip about Lecter, but he gets a toll-free number to some random lawyer in Geneva. And that doesn't go anywhere because the lawyer's basically like, you have to pay an astronomical amount of money to even speak with me in the first place. And again, Pazzi doesn't have a lot of money. That's why he wants the $3 million reward. So he has to come up with a plan. Now, shortly after this phone call, he goes to meet Dr. Fell, aka Lecter, at Dr. Lecter's residence. Now, remember, Lecter is staying as a protege at the residence of the person who mysteriously vanished that was, like, his mentor. And he had mentioned earlier, like, oh, I have this mentor's belongings if you want to come pick them up. And so that's kind of why Pazzi goes there. And we see 4 suitcases that they will be collecting. And Lecter says that they are very heavy. He says, they must be heavy as bodies. So I suspect that there are a lot of body parts in those suitcases. We see Lecter putting on a set of gloves. So again, being very wary of leaving behind fingerprints and things like that. So Pazzi helps Lecter carry out the suitcases. Again, we can infer that there is a body in those suitcases that has been dismembered, but we don't know that for sure, and it's never specifically clarified. Next, we have Pazzi hiring a pickpocket who he wants to get... Well, basically, Pazzi buys a silver bracelet, and then he hires a pickpocket, and he wants the pickpocket to get Lecter's fingerprints on the bracelet. Really stupid plan, if you ask me. But it is what it is. So we get this whole sequence where the pickpocket is following Lecter. Lecter's acting super casual. We as the audience can tell that Lecter knows he's being followed. So Lecter ultimately intercepts the pickpocket and stabs him in a major artery in the leg, right where the groin is. The pickpocket bleeds out, dies, and he gives Pazzi the silver bracelet and is basically like, I got it. He touched it, his fingerprints on there. After the pickpocket dies, Pazzi goes to the nearest fountain, and just like Clarice, he washes the blood off of his hands, except he's washing the blood off of himself. He's not washing the blood off of somebody else. So instead of a selfless act like Clarice, there is a selfish act on Pazzi's part. So now he's very clearly got blood on his hands. It ends up going to waste, but we'll get there in a second. So we learn that the reason Pazzi wants the fingerprints on the bracelet is because Verger ultimately buys the bracelet since it's proven that it's, by like some program, that it's a match to Hannibal Lecter's fingerprints. Verger gives him, I want to say like $250,000, enough money that Pazzi will be able to go talk to that lawyer. Verger then calls some friends who are raising very giant pigs, and it's very clear that Verger wants these pigs to eat Lecter. So Pazzi takes the money that he gets from Verger to put like a down payment on the lawyer in Geneva, and then we kind of go from there. Now, until this point, I was kind of frustrated because Clarice isn't in this film a lot. And she was very much the main character in the first film, and she's not anymore right now. And I was very frustrated by that because I was like, then what's the freaking point? But it is what it is, I guess. I can't get too upset about it because eventually this guy bites the dust and we get Clarice again. And once we are done with this handy-dandy little sequence, Sorry, my dog has decided that because it's raining, he's going to bark. So if you hear him in the background, I apologize. He very much interrupted my thought process, but we're going to try and figure out where it was that I left off. Yes, okay. So then we go to the opera scene where Pazzi takes his wife Allegra to the opera, and we learn that Lecter is actually at the same opera that Pazzi and his wife are at. Pazzi is staring at Lecter because at this point we know that Pazzi knows that's Hannibal Lecter. And then Hannibal Lecter does this dramatic turn and he stares directly at Pazzi and does not break eye contact. Pazzi, on the other hand, submits to Lecter and just kind of like glances away, pretends he doesn't notice anything, different things like that. But Lecter still continues to stare at Pazzi. The opera comes to an end, and I'm not sure what opera it was that they saw. Personally, I don't care. There's probably some symbolism there, but I'm not going to get too bent up over it. Pazzi introduces Lecter to his wife Allegra, and Lecter and Allegra start talking, and he kisses her hand a time or two, which always makes me nervous because I think he's just going to bite people, given, the whole cannibalism thing. But she's like, oh, where are you from? Are you from America? He's like, no, but I've been. She's like, oh, I've always wanted to go to America, specifically New England. And Lecter, very tongue-in-cheek, is like, oh, I've enjoyed many excellent meals there, in reference to all of his cannibal activities and, chewing people's faces off and things like that. We also learned that Pazzi's first name, I think, is Ronaldo, but it might also be Francesco, because that's kind of the name that he used to sign into the FBI computer, so I'm not really sure. I'm just going to call him Pazzi anyways, but yeah, we get like a weird little first name thing for him. After this, Pazzi ends up making plans with the pig guys that know Verger, and their goal is to get Lecter, and this is also somewhat facilitated through the lawyer in Geneva. Pazzi ultimately goes to a lecture by Lecter, say that 5 times fast, and Lecter is in the middle of discussing the downfall of people through pride. And this is important because Pazzi has started to get phone calls from Clarice basically saying, hey, you don't want to do this. I know you're trying to do this for the reward, but Lecter will kill you. He's dangerous. And he doesn't really care. So this is in direct reference to Pazzi's determination to catch Lecter on his own and ignoring everything that Clarice is saying about Lecter. So, again, symbolism, because Lecter's talking about Judas, who, as we know, betrayed Jesus. And it was a pride thing. It was a greed thing. And, again, very symbolic of Pazzi and why he wants to catch Lecter by himself and get the $3 million. Pazzi is also, during this interaction, shown an image of his hanging ancestor, which Lecter references earlier in the film and is like, oh, didn't your ancestor 500 years ago get hung and, besmirched in front of the entire city because he betrayed a bunch of people and nobody liked him? So, again, more symbolism. While Pazzi is looking at this image of his ancestor, Lecter soaks a rag in chloroform and puts Pazzi to sleep. As he's doing this and Pazzi's falling under, he tells him that he's strongly thinking about eating his wife. Lecter then makes a noose to string Pazzi up and actually duct tapes Pazzi to a trolley replicating his former restraints and mask from the first movie. Good God, I cannot talk today. From the first movie. This is very intentional, and we see this again when in an instance with Verger. While Pazzi is basically kidnapped by Lecter, Lecter's like, hey, blink once for no, blink twice for yes. Are you trying to, take me to Verger and get me killed by these 2 weird guys that are seemingly following me everywhere? And Pazzi's like, blink, blink, and it's a whole conversation. But while all of this is happening, there's a phone call that comes in, and it's Clarice, and she's like, oh my God, I don't care what you're talking about, Pazzi. I went to your supervisors, and you're gonna get fucked because this is stupid. And then there's no answer, and Lecter's like, hello, Clarice. And there's this oh shit moment where she's like, oh my God, are you killing him? And Lecter's like, oh, you've caught me at a bad time. Oh no. Oh, I'm gonna take care of my business. Call you back later. Ta-ta. And then hangs up because he's just that guy. Ultimately, the pig guys see Lecter wheeling Pazzi out onto this balcony, and Pazzi is then disemboweled and hung, again referencing the lecture that Lecter gave on Judas, and again referencing the previous ancestor of Potsy and his disembowelment and hanging. Again, this is somewhat symbolic because the initial relationship was that Potsy was on good terms with Lecter, didn't know that he was Lecter, just knew him as Dr. Fell, and then ultimately betrayed him to try and get a bunch of money. So again, very symbolic, very reminiscent of Judas's story, although I wouldn't necessarily say that Lecter is Jesus, but whatever. One of the big guys named Carlo is then killed by Lecter, or at least I think it's Carlo. No, okay, I don't know this dude's name, but the one that survives is named Carlo. One gets his neck cut open by Lecter, and this ends up all over the news. Clarice ends up seeing footage of Potsy's body hanging and swaying from the balcony with his entrails hanging out of his stomach. Lecter also waves at the camera, which Verger sees on the news because, again, he's bedridden and the only thing he knows how to do is watch the TV. Specifically, like, the weird news channels that have to do with Lecter. I don't really know how he gets those. Maybe they're on, like, HBO Max or something, but he's like, oh my god, was that a wave hello or a wave goodbye? I personally think he's just reading too much into it, but whatever. We then cut to Clarice, who is out on a run. We see, like, this figure in the background who we can assume is Lecter, but we don't really get confirmation for that. I think he has a line later that's like, I even followed you out on a run. So I'm pretty sure that was him. He was watching her and observing her. We then cut to Verger wearing a Hannibal mask, and he's like, Cordell, get this off of me, I can't breathe. And then I was like, well, you're dumb. But then I was like, isn't he low-key kind of into that, though? Because we talked about the whole erotic asphyxiation thing. Is he just not in the mood, or what? So, yeah, again, a weird obsession there. He asks Cordell if Lecter wants to kill, eat, or have sex with Clarice, which is something we'll kind of get into later, but it's very clear that Verger kind of sees Clarice as a threat. And I want to get into Verger's pathology a little bit, where I think he's still weirdly, like, sexually attracted to Lecter. I think his obsession and romantic interest in Lecter has morphed into sadism more than anything. He wants to watch Lecter get tortured, and I think it's going to get him to, like, it'll help him get his rocks off, basically. That is Verger's entire goal. But I think he's still very much sexually interested in Lecter, and I don't think that ever went away. It just morphed and changed from a genuine sexual interest into something that is more depraved and dark and sadistic in nature. Because if he didn't have these feelings, there's no reason for him to be wondering what Lecter's relationship with Clarice is and why he would despise Clarice as much as he does. So that's kind of my take on Verger's relationship with Lecter. I think he definitely wants this revenge, but there's a sexual component to it that I think is missing from, like, just about everybody's interactions with Lecter. Anywho, we get Verger and Krendler, who end up scheming to ruin Clarice's career, all for the sake of $500,000, which, don't get me wrong, $500,000 is a lot of money, especially back then. It'll do a good chunk of change now, too, to be honest. I would love to have $500,000, but here we are in this strange economy. Verger is basically like, oh, because I hate Clarice so much and she's a little bitch, what if I help you fire her? Because remember how she's supposed to, like, turn all these documents over to you? What if I just make one and say, oh, she never gave it to you? And, Krendler's like, oh, that's a sick idea, Verger. Give it to me for $500,000. And that's what happens. So, Clarice is put on administrative leave, and Krendler is seen walking away whistling, which is actually a frequent motif of Lecter's. Lecter will often walk around whistling, either after he's done something incredibly heinous and evil, or is plotting to do something incredibly heinous or evil. So we kind of get this idea that Krendler is not that different from Lecter. He's just not killing people. He's only ruining their hard-earned careers. We then have Krendler go away on a bike ride, and he's wearing this dumb, stupid-ass little hat. I don't know if that was, like, a style choice back then or what, but it looks stupid as shit, and it makes me just want to, like, flick it off his head. I can't. The bill is, like, cranked at a 90-degree angle, like, straight. It's so stupid. I don't understand it at all. I hated it so much. Anywho, Krendler goes on a bike ride. Lecter enters his home. He, like, is kind of cool with the dog, which I'm appreciative of, because if he hurt that dog, I would have been so upset. But I guess dogs are off limits, so thank you, Lecter, for having that sort of moral guidance. He takes a piece of mail from Krendler, And then he goes and buys an entire new dining set and then steals a plethora of medical equipment, all of which will come into play later. We also then get a bit of opera music in the background, which is super nice and kind of reminiscent of the fact that Lecter definitely likes opera music, because we get a lot of it in the first film, and then obviously he goes to the opera in the second film, and then we're getting it another time. So, unfortunately, Clarice is on administrative leave. She goes to clear out her office, which is super sad. She is then very depressed and goes home and drinks some whiskey and ends up falling asleep. At which point, Lecter casually just waltzes into Clarice's home, not a big deal, and does a few things, and then just leaves. He ends up putting a small cutout of a newspaper clipping on a magazine, which is on the coffee table. Clarice sees this when she wakes up. She's actually woken up by her phone ringing, and guess what? It's Lecter calling her and being like, hey, by the way, I was just in your house. Don't worry about it. I didn't do anything weird or freaky. By the way, you might want to change your phone battery. He then walks her through what he wants her to do. And while this is happening, she's being followed by the pig guys. And Clarice is like, hey, I'm being followed. And he's like, yeah, dude, I know. And she's like, well, they're following me because they know I'll lead them, I'll take them to you. Also, during this conversation, he says, quote, you have very shapely feet, end quote, which threw me off, okay? I don't know if the foot fetish memes were a thing back then, but I was definitely not prepared for him to be like, oh, by the way, I like your toes. But he's a cannibal, so I guess he's thinking pigs in blanket or something. I don't really know, but I was definitely confused about it. Anywho, Lecter's like, hey, how do you feel about the fact that these dickheads put you on administrative leave? And Clarice is like, oh, I don't really know, this, that, and the other thing. And he said something that really resonated with me, which is weird because it comes from Hannibal Lecter. But he says, quote, they don't like you because you're not like them. They hate you and they envy you. They're weak and unruly and believe in nothing, end quote. And again, because some of the experiences that I've had in my own workplace have mirrored Clarice's, that shit hit like a truck, let me tell you. There are a lot of people that I have met in my line of work who do things for a very different reason than I do. I, myself, I would like to say I'm a good person. That is my goal. At the end of the day, I want to be as good of a person as I can be. And I think that's how a lot of people are. But I have found that people's motivations for getting into lines of work where you serve the public are very different. Some people do it for the possible publicity, the recognition. Some people do it because they want to do, quote, cool shit. They want to be seen as this big, heroic, grand, larger-than-life self. And I relate to Clarice in the sense that at the end of the day, what I want to do is the right thing. I don't necessarily want the recognition. If that happens, great. But small interactions matter too. It's not always about the cool big thing that you did. It's not about, getting yourself into a position for a career in politics. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. There's a way to do it that's ethical and moral. But a lot of people don't operate that way. And a lot of people want these things that at face value sound nice, but morally and ethically aren't always the right way of doing it. And I have found in my own experiences that gets a lot of pushback sometimes. And it's not coming from a place of, oh, I'm better than you, but from a place of we have very different motivations for why we're doing what we're doing. And I can't agree with certain practices that are being done or things that are being said because they go against, the oath that I took and my own morals and my own compass. And so I really related to this quote and really related to Clarice's experience throughout this film of having to navigate a system that feels very much targeted towards you and like you are just fighting uphill. So it was really weird to relate to something that heavily, especially coming from Hannibal Lecter, but here we are. On a side note, the way Lecter says mommy and daddy is so sarcastic and grossed out, and he's just like, oh god, your mom and your dad? Ugh. It's a little bit funny, I won't lie. It kind of makes me giggle every time he does it. I think he did it 3 or 4 times in this film, and every time I was just giggling to myself. Anywho, he ends up buying Clarice like a nice pair of Gucci heels, and I don't remember what heels Allegra was wearing, but there is a shot of her, I think, putting heels on, and I think they might have been hers. Let me actually, you know what, I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna Google this because I'm curious. Okay, I just Googled it. The general consensus is that the heels did not come from Allegra, so we're not gonna go down that rabbit hole. I really thought that they did. But anywho, Clarice gets a set of Gucci heels from Hannibal. Don't ask me really why, but he did. Hannibal leaves like this mall. I think they're at a mall, and he gets tased. Which I've been there. I've done that. That shit hurts. And Lecter is then kidnapped by the pig guys sent by Verger. Clarice is obviously involved in this. And one of her supervisors is like, oh my god, a hysterical woman. And she's like, I'm a woman, but I am not hysterical. I gave you the description of the car. I told you what happened. And here's the license plate. So a bunch of officers and FBI people go to Verger's mansion. They don't find anything. And that's because the van is not at the Verger mansion yet. They basically camped out until Verger called them and said, hey, everything's clear. Go ahead and bring them back. And that is what happened. So Lecter is wheeled into Verger's home on a dolly strapped down, very reminiscent of, again, the iconic scene of him in the first movie on the dolly with the mask, except he doesn't have the mask this time. Clarice, knowing that Lecter's been kidnapped, is on her way to save Lecter. Lecter is then told by Verger that he'll be fed to pigs, feet first, and then he will have like a saline drip running over the open wounds, which is really messed up. But again, like I said, sadistic pleasure in this. Lecter gets taken to like this weird little like pigsty area. It's like a fighting ring that was made out of a bunch of wood. The best part though is that he's being rolled out like he's on a cross on a forklift. So he's basically just T-posing on a forklift. He is, however, wearing the mask that Verger himself has also worn. So again, there's a weird little intimacy with that. And Lecter's feet are exposed while he is T-posing on the forklift. The pigs are huge, fucking massive. And Verger is being taken down to the pig show by Cordell, but he's in a fancy little tux. So he's very excited about what's going to happen. The pigs are like banging into the walls. Again, the walls are made out of wood, so there's a lot of stuff going on there. And then Clarice shows up, and she's like, everybody freeze, put your hands in the air. And they do. So she ends up shooting both of the guys, handcuffing them together. She gets shot in the process. The pigs break out. The pigs start eating the bad guys. Lecter picks up Clarice and carries her out. And as they're leaving, Verger's like, Cordell, shoot them. And Lecter just looks at Cordell and is like, hey, why don't you just push him in? You can tell them I did it. And Cordell doesn't even hesitate. He puts the little motorized wheelchair in like forward motion. And then Verger falls in and he also gets eaten by the pigs. Which I shouldn't laugh, but it's a little bit silly. Anywho, Lecter drives away with Clarice. He gets the bullet out of her shoulder, stitches her up. We realize that the dining set bought previously by Lecter was for Krendler's home, where they are now going to have a nice dinner. Clarice has dialed 911. The cops are like, we'll be there in 10 minutes, which feels really weird for a kidnapping that just happened, but plot points. Clarice is wearing the Gucci heels, a nice black dress. She realizes that there's some messed up shit that happened with Krendler, whose skull cap was removed. And Lecter is now making Krendler eat his own brains, which is really messed up. And then Clarice and Lecter get into a bit of a spat with each other, because she's just continuously fighting back. And he's not really having it, but he's not going to hurt her either. And eventually he shuts her ponytail in the fridge, and then she handcuffs them together. And he picks up this giant cleaver, and he's like, what do you think, above or below the wrist? And you think that he's going to chop her hand off, but he doesn't. He chops his own hand off, which is interesting, and not necessarily what I expected, but I have a belief system as to why. Lecter ultimately ends up escaping. And the ending scene is him on a plane with a little kid who he ends up feeding Krendler's brains to. And he's like, oh, my mom always said to try new things. Little messed up, but here we are. So, what's going on exactly between Clarice and Lecter? Because there's also a moment where Lecter kisses Clarice when she is trapped against the fridge. And some people take this as romantic. Now, my understanding, I have not read the books. My understanding is that in the books there is a romantic relationship between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter. But I don't think that that's taking place in the films itself. What I think is happening is, one, there's a lot of respect between the two of them. And two, I think there's a lot of understanding. I think it's also reminiscent of the fact that you have basically the quintessential person of good and a quintessential person of evil, and they cannot exist without the other. One, good does not exist without evil. It's yin and yang. And I think that they both recognize that about each other. I think that Clarice is able to look at Lecter and go, this is a bad guy. He kills people. But in a weird way, there's some good in him too. Because he has this weird moral compass, this weird set of ethics where he's not targeting people like Barney. He's not targeting people like Clarice. He is targeting people who are deceitful, untrustworthy, uncivilized, prideful, greedy people. And in a weird way, it's no different than the prison system and them targeting people who prey on children. There's this weird code within being a criminal. He's not killing people that, by definition, are innocent. And we have Clarice, who, by all intents and purposes, is somebody he can't kill based on that ethical and moral system because she represents everything good. He's even saying, basically, the reason that the FBI is going against you is because you are everything that they are not. They are corrupt. They are deceitful. They are evil. You are not. You genuinely believe in being good and doing good things. And that is why he cuts his own hand off, and he doesn't cut hers off. My takeaway from that is he's not going to hurt her because there is a line there that he cannot cross. He has that barrier for himself of, she is good. She represents good. I am bad. Therefore, the solution is obvious to him. If he's going to cut anybody's hand off, it's going to be his own. I don't think that the kiss was romantic at all. I think in the end, it's this one. I think there's two things, because he does ask her, if you loved me, would you tell me to stop? And she goes, like, not in a 1,000 years or something along those lines, basically saying, I don't love you, like, fuck off type of thing. I think he kissed her to make sure and be like, okay, there is nothing here. And then I think he also was just asserting one final, like, act of control and dominance. Because, yes, they have an understanding. Yes, they have a respect for each other. But Lecter, in a way, has always controlled the interactions that have happened. Everything has been transactional with him. Quid pro quo. I give you info, you give me info. So, I think it was more of, like, a goodbye kiss of, like, I am part of your life. I will have control over you. I'm not going to hurt you, but understand that the dynamic that we have, I will be on top. I will always be asking something of you. I don't think it was romantic. And again, it's different in the books, but here I think it was to establish control. Because the shot isn't framed in a way where it's like, oh, that's cute, that's romantic. There's no basis for that. And given the circumstances of the interaction, they're both trapped together. They can't leave. Her hair's shut in the freaking refrigerator. Like, you know? And I think another thing to consider, too, is with him cutting off his own hand is it's no different than, like, a bear stuck in a bear trap chewing off its own foot to escape. Clarice is basically posing a dilemma to him of either you stay here, you do the right thing, and you get captured, or you leave. And to be honest, he could have hurt her if he wanted to. He didn't. And now that I'm talking about it, I think there's a third reason why the kiss happened. Because he leans in and kind of gnashes his teeth. Like, he wants to bite her. And instead of doing that, he redirects it into a kiss. Something that's softer, something that's more gentle, something that's not actually going to hurt her. So we still see his violent nature, his violent tendencies, and that side of him come out where he is Hannibal Lecter, the cannibal. He does kill people. And for a split second, he almost crosses that line. But he doesn't. And he pulls himself back and he reminds himself of his moral and ethical line of, I'm not going to cross this threshold. I'm not going to do it. One thing that I wish was more in this film was the symbolism. In the first film, there is a lot of symbolism, especially with the moths, and I think that is very lacking in all of this. But I will say one thing that I think really sticks out is the reference of a mirror, because during the last dinner scene, Lecter asks Clarice, why are you doing all of this? Is it for a medal? Is it to prove that you're a good person? Is it for recognition? He tells her, you would see all of that if you looked in the mirror. And on the flip side, we have Verger, who broke the mirror, who couldn't look at himself, who was his own destruction. Now Hannibal is telling Clarice, you will find your own fulfillment if you look in the mirror. And it's not a broken mirror. It's not damaged. Instead of destroying her, it'll build her up. And the thing that I find interesting as well is, there's no sexual romantic component to this at all. Again, that barrier has not been crossed, so Clarice's mirror is still intact. She's not going to hurt herself or be the cause of her own demise. The way that Verger was and is. I don't think I have any other notes on the film. I think it did very well for a sequel. I don't think it necessarily lives up to the way the first film does, but I think it holds its own fairly well. There's not as many psychological aspects to it. I will say that as far as Lecter's traits go, again, we can see, he doesn't blink a whole lot. He doesn't mirror other people's body language or expressions. That's something that humans do when interacting with each other. We often mimic or mirror certain behaviors, and that's not something that Lecter does, which again is very well portrayed in this film, especially with his interactions with Potsy. He's very stiff, and this is going to sound bad, but it comes off almost like autistic behavior in a way, in the sense that there's this discordance to it, where it doesn't necessarily look natural. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just very distinct for somebody whose brain is not wired in the way that the average humans is, to seek out connection and to find comfort in connection. There's a detachment there, and you can see that in how stiff that Lecter moves, and his clipped way of talking, and the way that he doesn't really blink, and his ability to maintain eye contact no matter how uncomfortable it makes people. But that's all I've got. If you guys have other psych movies similar to Silence of the Lambs or Hannibal, please, please, please let me know. I would love to look at them. I think that would be fantastic. Don't forget to comment, and subscribe, and do all of the things. I've got to figure out what I'm doing for next week's episode. But thank you guys for being here. And as always, stay safe, stay vigilant, and stay psyched out.